The Vren Empire had conquered 400 worlds without losing a single ship. 400. That's the number that matters. That's the number they carved into their war banners and sang about in their conquest halls. 400 worlds and not one ship lost across 1,000 years of expansion. They found Earth in the spring of the year I turned 19. By autumn, the number was 0. 0 worlds conquered that year, and a fleet that had never lost a ship had lost 200 of them in a single afternoon, to a thing nobody, not them, not us, not even the people who built it, had known was still down there, sleeping under the ice, waiting. I watched it wake up. I'm one of maybe a few thousand people alive who saw it with their own eyes and lived, so I'll tell you. But you have to let me start slow, with the part before the fire, because the fire doesn't mean anything if you don't understand how completely we'd already lost. My name is Cass Holloway, and in those days I was a relay technician at HFY Station, a little orbital platform over the south pole of Earth, the kind of nothing posting they give to 19-year-olds with more aptitude scores than connections. I monitored deep space comms relays. I drank bad coffee. I watched the aurora over the pole, which from up there is the most beautiful thing in the universe, great green and violet curtains rippling over the white. It was a quiet life. I thought it would stay quiet. Earth in those days was united but small. We'd had a rough couple of centuries, climate, wars, the slow hard work of not destroying ourselves, and we'd come out the other side battered and careful and finally getting somewhere. We had a few colonies in the solar system, a small fleet, more Coast Guard than Navy. We'd been listening to the stars for generations and never heard anything answer, and we'd more or less made peace with the idea that we were alone, or near enough, and that whatever was out there was too far away to matter. We were wrong about the alone part. We found that out the day the Vren arrived. They didn't sneak up, that wasn't their way. The Vren Empire had conquered 400 worlds by being certain, by arriving in overwhelming force and announcing exactly what was about to happen, because terror did half their work for them. So when their advanced fleet came out of the dark past the orbit of Neptune, they came broadcasting, on every frequency, a single message, repeated in 100 of our own languages that they'd somehow already learned, calm and absolute. People of the Third World, you have been claimed by the Vren Empire. Your resistance is noted and forgiven in advance as it is meaningless. Stand by for integration. The Empire has never lost. The Empire has never lost. They put it right there in the first message. Not a threat, a fact. 1,000-year unbroken record, stated as plainly as the weather. I was at my post on HFY Station when that message came through, and I remember the whole station going silent, every one of us just frozen at our consoles, listening to the voice of something that had eaten 400 worlds tell us politely that we were next. I want to be honest about how badly it went at first, because the histories sometimes skip this part and they shouldn't. We fought and we lost fast. Earth's little fleet, our brave, outmatched Coast Guard fleet, went out to meet the Vren advance because what else do you do? And the Vren went through them like a hand through smoke. I had a cousin on one of those ships, the Tenacity. It lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes against a Vren battle line and then it was gone, and so was she, and so were most of the others. The Vren didn't even slow down. 400 worlds never lost a ship, and Earth's entire navy was a speed bump they barely felt. Within a week, the Vren held the high orbitals. They sat above our world in a fleet so vast it was visible from the ground, a new constellation of warships hanging over every city, and they began what they called integration, which was the polite Vren word for the end of you as a free people. They didn't bombard us, that wasn't their way either. They wanted the world intact and useful. They simply took control. Seized the orbital stations, including HFY's, where I sat at my post with a Vren boarding party standing behind me, having decided a relay tech was too useful to kill and too harmless to bother restraining. They cut our communications. They installed their administrators. They began, methodically, the the thousand-year perfected process of turning a free world into another quiet province of the empire. And the worst part, the part that broke people more than the fighting, was that the Vren were right. It really was meaningless. We really couldn't win. They really had never lost. Every instinct we had to resist crashed against the simple arithmetic of 400 worlds and 0 ships lost. The despair that settled over Earth in those first weeks wasn't the hot despair of battle. It was the cold despair of math. We had run the numbers, and the numbers said accept it, and there is nothing harder to fight than a number. I sat at my console on a captured station with an alien empire occupying my homeworld, and I thought, the way everyone thought, this is how it ends. Not with a war, with a form to sign. I had no idea that 2 kilometers under the Antarctic ice, something that had been asleep for a very long time, had just begun, very slowly, to notice that the wrong people were knocking. Here is the thing nobody knew. Not me, not the Vren, not the government of Earth, not anyone alive. Here is the secret that had been sitting under our feet, under the ice, the whole time. Earth had been attacked before. Not in recorded history. Long, long before, so long before that there was no one left to remember it, no records, no legends, nothing but the thing itself, buried and forgotten. A previous age, a previous war, some earlier people, and to this day we don't fully know who they were, whether they were ancient humans or something that came before us or something that visited us and left. Some earlier people had faced an extinction-level threat from the stars, and they had built a defense against it. A weapon, a guardian. An automated war machine of staggering scale and power, buried deep beneath the South Polar ice where it could never be found by accident, set to sleep until the day the threat returned. And then the threat, apparently, had been defeated, or had gone away, or the war had ended in some way we'll never know. And the people who built the Guardian had died, or moved on, or been forgotten. And the machine had gone to sleep under the ice as instructed, waiting for an enemy that never came back. For a span of time so long it doesn't fit in a human mind, the Guardian slept. Civilizations rose and fell on the surface above it and never knew it was there. Ice ages came and went. Humanity evolved, built cities, split the atom, reached for the stars, and the whole time 2 kilometers down, the most powerful machine our world had ever held lay dreaming its long, dreamless sleep. Its ancient sensors still faintly running, still faintly listening, still set, after all that time, to one single instruction. If a hostile fleet ever again takes the high orbitals of this world, wake and end them. The Vren took the high orbitals in a week. They did it with a fleet of 200 warships, exactly the kind of hostile orbital presence the Guardian had been built, eons ago, to destroy. They had no idea. How could they? There was nothing to detect. The Guardian was buried too deep, powered down too low, too old and too silent for even Vren sensors to find. To the Empire, Earth was just another primitive world with a pathetic little fleet, conquered on schedule, no different from the 400 before it. They never knew they'd parked their entire invasion fleet directly above a sleeping god of war, and tripped the one alarm it had been waiting eons to hear. It started small. That's what I remember most. The end of the Vren Empire's perfect record started with a flicker on my own console, and I almost didn't notice it. I was still at my post on Haver's station. They'd kept the human techs running the relays under Vren's supervision, because we knew the systems and they didn't, and a relay tech is too small to bother replacing. And about 3 weeks into the occupation, on an ordinary cold coffee morning, I caught a strange reading on the deep geological sensors. Havers monitored a lot of things, including seismic and geological data from the poles, and that morning something deep under the Antarctic ice registered a pulse. A single deep pulse, like something enormous, very far down, had taken its first breath in a very long time. I logged it as a geological anomaly, a glacial shift maybe. I almost forgot about it. Then it happened again, and again. Slow at first, then faster, deep pulses from under the South Polar ice, rhythmic, building, each one bigger than the last. The seismic sensors started lighting up across the whole polar region. And the Vren's supervisor on the station, a tall, armored officer who'd been ignoring us humans as beneath notice, came over to look at my console when the alerts wouldn't stop, and frowned at the readings, and said something into his comm in the clicking Vren tongue that the translators rendered as, "What is the third world doing?" I told him the truth. "I don't know, something's happening under the ice, something big, it's never done this before." He dismissed it. Of course he did. The Vren had conquered 400 worlds. What was a little seismic activity on a beaten planet? The third world settles, that is all, he said. Conquered worlds groan. It means nothing. He was wrong, it meant everything. But I understood his certainty, because it was the same certainty that had made the Empire what it was, 1,000 years of never being wrong, never losing, never once encountering a thing they hadn't already accounted for. The Vren had a category for everything. They did not have a category for the planet itself waking up to kill you, because in 400 conquests, that had never once happened, and a thing that has never happened in 1,000 years stops being a thing you watch for. The pulses kept building, and down under the ice the Guardian finished waking up. I felt it before I saw it, we all did. Everyone on Earth and in orbit felt it, a deep, bone-level vibration that came up through everything, through the station's hull, through the ground, through your own chest, a sensation like standing next to something impossibly large that has just begun to move. The aurora over the pole, that beautiful green-violet curtain, went strange, flaring and twisting in patterns I'd never seen, as if the magnetic field of the whole planet was being disturbed by something underneath it. And then on the polar sensors, on every camera and instrument pointed at the south, we watched the ice break. 2 kilometers of Antarctic ice, ice that had been frozen solid since before there were human beings, and it cracked, it heaved, it broke apart in a ring kilometers across, and out of the breaking ice rose the Guardian. I don't have good words for it. I've tried for years to describe it to people who weren't there, and I always fail, because it was too big and too strange and too old. Imagine something the size of a mountain range that was also unmistakably a machine, vast and dark and intricate, built in a style that was nothing human, nothing Vren, nothing anyone alive had ever seen, covered in the frost of eons, shedding ice the size of cities as it rose. It came up out of the broken pole slowly, enormously, like a leviathan surfacing, and as it rose it woke, lights kindling along its impossible surface, deep ancient lights coming on one after another after a sleep of ages, a sleeping god opening 1,000 eyes. And it looked up, the whole vast machine oriented, slow and certain, toward the Vren fleet hanging in the high orbitals above, toward the 200 warships that had taken the orbital space of its world, the exact thing it had been built and buried and set eons ago to watch for. The Vren fleet, to their credit, understood in that moment that something was very wrong. I was monitoring their comms, they'd never bothered to lock me out, why would they, and I heard the calm certainty of the Empire crack for the first time in 1,000 years. The clicking voices going faster, sharper. What is that? What is rising? Sensors could not detect, that is impossible, there was nothing there, all batteries, target the, what is that? The Guardian finished rising. It hung there, vast and ancient and awake, a mountain of forgotten war floating above the South Pole, facing up at an empire that had never lost. And then, after eons of sleep, it spoke. Not in words, it had no words, or none anyone could read. It spoke in light and in power, a single pulse of something that lit up every sensor in the solar system, and that I have always thought of, since, as the only thing it could possibly have been saying, the one instruction it had carried through all that endless dark, finally answered. Found you. And the dormant war machine of Earth, awake at last, opened fire on the Vren Empire. What happened in the next afternoon is the reason the Vren number changed from 400 to 0. And the reason I'm telling you this. And the reason the whole galaxy knows the name of Earth now, when 3 weeks earlier they'd never heard of us. But I'm not going to rush it, because the how of it matters, and because the part that comes after the firing, the part where we learned what the Guardian actually was, and what it wanted, and the terrible choice it put in front of a conquered and frightened human race, that's the real story. For now, I'll just tell you what that first afternoon looked like, from a captured station, through the eyes of a 19-year-old relay tech who'd spent 3 weeks believing his world had ended. It did not look like a battle. A battle is 2 sides fighting. This was not that. The Vren fleet, 200 warships, the unstoppable instrument of 1,000 years of conquest, the fleet that had never lost, fired everything it had at the rising Guardian, every weapon, every battery, the combined firepower that had ended 400 worlds. And it splashed against the Guardian's ancient hull like rain against a mountain. Nothing. Eon's old armor, built to survive a war we couldn't imagine, shrugging off the worst the Empire could do as if it were weather. And then the Guardian fired back. Once, and 40 Vren ships simply stopped existing, not destroyed, not broken, just gone, unmade in a single pulse of a weapon that no one alive understood. The Vren fleet, for the first time in 1,000 years, broke formation, scattered, ran. And the Guardian, patient, ancient, awake, doing the one thing it had been built to do, turned and tracked them, and fired again. And again, methodical and unhurried, eons of sleep poured into a single afternoon of purpose. By nightfall over the pole, the aurora rippling green and violet over a broken ring of ice and a floating mountain of forgotten war, the Vren Empire had lost 200 ships. All of them. The fleet that had never lost a ship in 400 conquests was gone, in an afternoon, above a primitive world it had dismissed, killed by a thing that had been sleeping under the ice the whole time, waiting for exactly them. The number was 0. And every one of us who watched it, every human on Earth and in orbit, every one of us who 3 weeks earlier had been doing the cold, despairing math of accept it, stood frozen, watching our impossible salvation float over the pole, and felt a single shared thought go through the entire human race at once. What is that thing? And now that it's awake, what does it want from us? Because here's the part the histories make sound triumphant, and it wasn't, not that night. That night it was terrifying. We hadn't won. We'd been saved by something we didn't build, didn't understand, didn't control, and that had just demonstrated it could unmake fleets like rain. The Vren had been a known kind of fear, the fear of a boot coming down. This was a different fear entirely. We had a god of war floating over our South Pole, and it had just woken up after eons, and it had finished the one task it remembered, and now it was turning slowly, its 1,000 ancient eyes, to look at the world it had been built to protect at us. And none of us had the first idea what it would do when it saw what we'd become. I was at my console. The Vren supervisor beside me was dead, not killed, just collapsed, his certainty gone, his empire ended in an afternoon, staring at nothing. And on every screen the Guardian turned its ancient attention down toward the surface of Earth, toward its long-lost makers, toward the people it had slept eons to protect. And it began slowly to descend. The Guardian descended for 3 days, and for 3 days the human race held its breath. It came down slow. That was almost the worst part, the slowness. A thing that could unmake a fleet in an afternoon could surely have crossed the distance to the surface in minutes, but it didn't. It descended from the high orbitals toward the South Pole gradually, deliberately, over 3 full days, as if it were in no hurry at all, as if after eons of sleep it had all the time in the world. And we watched it come, on every screen on Earth, this floating mountain of forgotten war drifting down through our sky, and nobody knew whether it was coming to save us or to finish what the Vren had started, and the not knowing was a kind of torture that the whole species endured together. I was still on Haver's station. They couldn't get us down. The Vren had controlled all the transport, and the Vren were dead or fled, and the surviving human authorities were in chaos, and so a few thousand of us were simply stuck in orbit, watching the Guardian descend past us, close enough on the third day that it filled the entire view, close enough that I could see the detail of it, the eons-old intricacy, the frost still shedding off surfaces that had not moved since before humanity existed. And I will tell you the thing that struck me most, watching it pass. It was damaged. Old damage, ancient damage, scars across its vast hull, sections that had been broken and never repaired, the marks of whatever long ago war it had been built to fight. The Guardian had not slept under the ice because its work was easy. It had slept down there wounded, a veteran of a war so old we had no memory of it, scarred by enemies we couldn't imagine, and it had dragged itself down into the dark to heal or to wait or simply to endure, and it had endured for eons, and now it had woken to fight again. There was something unbearably lonely about that. A thing built for one purpose, that had done its purpose, and then waited alone in the cold and the dark for a longer time than any mind can hold, in case it was ever needed again. It was needed again, and it came. The human authorities tried to communicate with it. Of course they did. The surviving governments, scrambling to reassemble themselves after 3 weeks of occupation, threw everything they had at the problem of talking to the thing that just saved us. They broadcast on every frequency. They sent mathematical sequences, the old first contact protocols, prime numbers and physical constants, anything to say we're here, we're intelligent, we mean no harm, what are you? The Guardian didn't answer, not in any way we could read. It descended in silence, those ancient lights kindled along its hull, and it gave no sign that it heard us or saw us or cared that we existed at all. And that silence terrified people more than anything. Because a thing that doesn't answer is a thing you can't reason with, can't negotiate with, can't reach. And we had just watched this silent thing unmake 200 warships without apparent effort, and now it was descending toward us, and it would not say a word. The fear curdled the way fear does. There were people on Earth, I heard them, even up on the station, on the open channels, who started saying the Guardian had to be destroyed. That a thing that powerful and that silent and that uncontrollable was a threat worse than the Vren, that we'd traded a known master for an unknowable god, and that humanity would never be free or safe as long as that thing floated over our pole. They wanted to attack it. With what nobody could say, we had nothing that could scratch it. But fear doesn't do arithmetic, and there were people ready to throw our pathetic remaining weapons at the only thing that had ever saved us, because they could not bear to be saved by something they didn't understand. And there were others, and I was one of them, I admit it, who thought that was insane, who thought that a thing built to defend this world that had slept eons to protect it, that had woken at the exact moment we needed it and destroyed our conquerors, had earned, at the very least, our patience. That you do not attack the thing that saved your life just because it frightens you. That maybe, if it would not speak to us, the answer was to find a way to speak to it. The argument tore Earth apart in those 3 days, even as the Guardian descended. Destroy it or trust it. Fear it or reach it. And the argument was still raging when the Guardian reached the pole and settled, finally, over the broken ring of ice from which it had risen and went still. And waited. For what, we didn't know. That's when a scientist named Dr. Amara Osai figured out the thing that changed everything. And she figured it out in the end, the way the best human insights always seem to get figured out in these stories, not by being the smartest, but by asking a question nobody else thought to ask. Dr. Osai was a xenolinguist, one of the people who'd spent her career preparing for a first contact that everyone assumed would never come, studying how you might talk to a mind that shared nothing with your own. When the Vren arrived, her field had suddenly become the most important on Earth, and then the Vren had refused to really talk. They just conquered, and her expertise had seemed useless. And now there was the Guardian, silent over the pole, and Dr. Osai was one of the people assigned to crack its silence. I know all this because, in the chaos, the surviving authorities put out a call for anyone with relevant data, and Havers Station had the best continuous sensor record of the Guardian's awakening. I'd logged it, those first deep pulses under the ice, and so I ended up, a 19-year-old relay tech, on comms with Dr. Osai's team, feeding them everything Havers had recorded. I had a front row seat to how she solved it. And I've never forgotten the moment she did, because of what it taught me about the difference between fear and understanding. The whole team had been trying to send the Guardian a message it would answer. Prime numbers, constants, the works. And Dr. Osai, listening to it all fail, finally said the thing that turned it around. She said, "We keep trying to make it talk to us, but it's not built to talk. It's a Guardian, it's built to watch. It doesn't communicate, it observes. We're sending it messages and it's ignoring them because it doesn't speak. It looks." She pulled up the Guardian's awakening sequence, my data, the deep pulses, the rising, the firing. Look at what woke it. Not a message, not a signal, a condition, a hostile fleet in the orbitals. It doesn't respond to language. It responds to conditions, to states of the world. It's been reading the state of this world the entire time, for eons, through whatever ancient senses it has. It woke because the world entered a state it was built to act on. She looked around at her team. So we've been asking the wrong question. The question isn't how do we send it a message. The question is, what is it reading about us right now? What state does it see this world in? And what is it going to do about what it sees? That reframe cracked it open, because the Guardian wasn't silent out of indifference. It was silent because it was assessing. For 3 days it had descended, and now it sat over the pole, and the whole time it had been doing the only thing it knew how to do, reading the state of the world it had woken to protect, gathering information, trying to determine the situation it had slept eons to be ready for. It wasn't ignoring us. It was studying us, the way it studied everything, silently, through senses we couldn't perceive. And the terrifying question Dr. Osai had just named was the right one. What conclusion was it reaching? What did the Guardian see when it looked at modern humanity? And what was it built to do about what it saw? Dr. Osai's team worked frantically to understand what the Guardian was reading. And slowly, by watching how it responded to changes in the world's state, they began to piece together its ancient logic. And what they pieced together was the thing that turned the whole story, the secret at the heart of the Guardian, the reason it had been built, and the terrible problem it now posed. The Guardian had been built to protect the people of this world. That was its purpose, its prime directive, the thing it had carried through eons of sleep. Protect the people of this world from threats from the stars. Simple, noble, exactly what you'd want a Guardian to do. But here was the problem that no one who built it could have foreseen, the problem that eons of time had created. The Guardian had a definition of the people of this world, a specific one, encoded in it by its ancient makers, a pattern, a signature, some way of recognizing the people it was built to protect. And its makers were gone, long gone, dead or departed or evolved into something else across a span of time so vast that whatever they had been, they were not what humanity was now. The Guardian was built to protect a people who no longer existed. And it had woken into a world full of a different people, us, humanity, who had risen long after its makers vanished, who shared this world but not, perhaps, the ancient signature the Guardian was built to recognize. It defended the world, Dr. Osai said, when she understood, and her voice on the comm was hollow with the weight of it. It destroyed the Vren because the Vren were a hostile fleet in the orbitals. That's a condition, it acts on conditions, and hostile fleet in the orbitals triggered the defense regardless of who was below. But now it's done that. The immediate threat is gone, and now it's doing the next thing in its logic. It's assessing the people of this world, checking who's down here, determining whether the population it's protecting matches the population it was built to protect. She paused, and I could hear her dread. And we are not its makers. We're something that came after. We might not match the signature at all, and we don't know what it's built to do if the people it finds aren't the people it was made to protect. Maybe nothing. Maybe it just goes back to sleep, its maker's long dead, its job over. Or maybe. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. We all understood the or maybe. A war machine built to protect a specific people, that wakes to find that people gone and replaced by strangers. What does it do? Does it protect the strangers anyway? Does it ignore them? Or does it see them as occupiers, as something that has taken the world that belongs to its vanished makers, and act accordingly? We had been saved by the Guardian from the Vren. And now we face the possibility that the Guardian, having dealt with the Vren, would turn that same eons-old power on us, not out of malice, but out of ancient programming, because we were not the people it was built to love, and we were living on the world it was built to protect. And to a Guardian that reads conditions and not intentions, that might make us a threat to be removed. The thing that saved us might be about to inherit us as its next problem. Here is where the human part comes in, the part that's the whole reason these stories get told. Because faced with that terrible possibility, a god of war over our pole, deciding whether we counted as the people it was built to protect or as squatters to be cleared off, humanity did not, in the end, choose to fight it, though plenty wanted to. We chose to introduce ourselves. It was Dr. Osai's idea, and it was insane, and it was exactly right. We can't make it talk, she said. We can't make it understand language, but it reads the state of the world. It reads conditions, so let's show it a condition. Let's show it who we are, not in words it can't read, but in actions it can. The Guardian was built to protect the people of this world. So let's show it what kind of people we are. Let's give it something to read that tells the truth about us. And let's pray that the makers who built it to recognize not a signature, not a specific species, but a quality. The quality of being the kind of people worth protecting. Because if it only recognizes its maker's DNA or whatever ancient marker, we're lost. There's nothing we can do. But if its makers were wise, if they understood that the people of a world change over eons, that the ones you protect won't be the ones who come after, then maybe they built it to recognize something deeper than a signature. Maybe they built it to recognize us being worthy of it. And if they did, then we have to show it. We have to be worthy of it visibly, in a way a watching machine can read right now with everything on the line. And so the human race, 3 weeks after being conquered, an afternoon after being saved, did the strangest and most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. We showed the Guardian who we were. I won't be able to do this part justice, but I'll try. It started small and it spread, the way the best human things spread, not by order but by example. The first thing was the Vren survivors. Because there were Vren survivors, the crews of ships that had fled, that had crash-landed, that had surrendered, scattered Vren soldiers across Earth and in orbit, the remnants of the empire that had conquered us. The defeated occupiers. The ones who 3 weeks before had ended my cousin's life in 4 minutes and told us our resistance was meaningless. They were at our mercy now, beaten, stranded, helpless. And the easy thing, the thing 400 conquered worlds would have understood, the thing the Vren themselves would have done, was to kill them. Revenge, justice, the cold arithmetic of they would have done it to us. We didn't. I watched it happen from the station and on the channels. Across Earth, the scattered Vren survivors were taken in, treated. The wounded ones were healed by the same humans they'd conquered, in the same hospitals that had treated human casualties from the invasion. It wasn't ordered. There was barely a government left to order anything. It was just people, human people, finding beaten enemies at their mercy and choosing, over and over, individually to be merciful, to feed them, to tend their wounds, to not become the thing that had nearly destroyed us. I saw footage of a human doctor, exhausted, grieving. She'd lost family in the invasion, carefully setting the broken arm of a Vren soldier who wept the whole time, in shame or terror or something his people had no word for, because he could not understand why the conquered were saving him instead of killing him. And up over the pole the Guardian watched, silent, reading, taking in the state of the world it had woken to protect. Dr. Osai's team kept their sensors on it, watching for any flicker of how it was reading us. And as the mercy spread, as a conquered species chose, en masse, without being told, to heal its conquerors rather than slaughter them, something began to change in the Guardian's signature. The ancient lights along its hull, which had been a steady cold white, began slowly to shift, to warm, to change color in a way none of us could interpret but all of us could feel, the way you feel a mood change in a room. "It's reading it," Dr. Osai breathed, watching her sensors. "It's reading all of it, the mercy, the healing. We're showing it who we are and it's reading it and something's changing." Her voice broke. I think we might be passing. I think its makers were wise. I think they didn't build it to recognize a signature. I think they built it to recognize worth. To protect not their descendants specifically, but whoever inherited this world and proved themselves the kind of people worth protecting. And we're proving it, right now, by being merciful to the ones who conquered us when we had every reason and every right not to be. She was crying openly now. We're introducing ourselves to a God, Cass, and we're doing it by being our best selves at the exact moment it would have been easiest to be our worst. And it's working. But it wasn't over. That's the thing about these stories. The moment you think you've passed the test changes. Because the Guardian wasn't the only thing that had been watching. The Vren advance fleet that took Earth had been exactly that, an advance fleet. 200 ships, the leading edge of an empire that spanned 400 worlds. And when that advance fleet went silent, when 200 warships that had never lost a battle simply stopped transmitting, wiped out in an afternoon above a primitive world that should have been an easy conquest, the Vren Empire noticed. And the Vren Empire, which had 1,000 years of certainty to defend and a reputation that held 400 worlds in line, could not allow the disappearance of a fleet to go unanswered. So they sent the real fleet. Not 200 ships, 2,000. The Empire's main battle force, the instrument that had actually conquered those 400 worlds, the thing the advance fleets only represented. It came out of the dark past Neptune the same way the first one had, but vast beyond comparison. A fleet so large it didn't broadcast a warning because it didn't need to. A fleet that had come not to conquer Earth but to erase it, to make an example of the one world that had cost the Empire a fleet, so that the other 400 would never get ideas. And we saw it coming. Dr. Osai's team, the surviving authorities, all of us, we watched the real Vren fleet appear on the long-range sensors, 2,000 strong, inbound, and the brief, fragile hope of the last days collapsed into a new and total terror. Because yes, we had the Guardian. Yes, it had destroyed 200 ships, but 2,000. The Guardian was ancient and wounded and alone, scarred from a war eons gone, and it had spent an afternoon's worth of its unknowable power on the First Fleet. Could it stop 10 times as many? Did it have the strength? Had waking up and fighting after eons of sleep used something it couldn't replace? We didn't know. We had no way to know. And there was a worse fear underneath that one. Even if the Guardian could stop 2,000 ships, would it? It had woken to defend this world from a hostile fleet, yes, but it had just spent 3 days deciding whether we counted as the people it was meant to protect. If it had decided we did, if the Mercy had passed the test, then maybe it would fight for us. But if it hadn't quite decided, if we were still strangers to it, would it bother? Would it spend itself, perhaps die, defending a people who weren't its makers, against a fleet 10 times the size of the one that had already strained it? We were about to find out. The real Vren fleet was 3 days out. The Guardian sat silent over the pole, its lights warm now but its intentions unknowable. And humanity, saved once, tested once, merciful once, faced the possibility that all of it had been for nothing, that we'd proven ourselves worthy just in time to be erased anyway by a fleet too vast for even a god to stop. Dr. Osai came on the comm to me late, the night the real fleet appeared. She sounded exhausted past anything. "Cass," she said, "I need your sensor data again, all of it, everything Havers can read about the Guardian." Because we have 3 days and 2,000 ships and one ancient wounded machine that might or might not fight for us, and I am trying to figure out if there's anything at all that a few frightened humans can do to tip this. And I keep coming back to the same thing. Her voice steadied, found something. The Guardian reads conditions. It reads the state of the world. It fought the First Fleet because of a condition, and it warmed to us because of a condition, our mercy. So maybe, just maybe, we're not as helpless as the arithmetic says. Maybe there's a condition we can create, something we can do, some way we can be that tips the Guardian from a thing that might fight for us into a thing that will. That commits it. Body and soul, if it has them, to this world and these people. She took a breath. I don't know what that condition is yet, but I know it's human-shaped. Every answer in this whole nightmare has been human-shaped. We saved the conquerors and it warmed to us. So whatever tips it the rest of the way, whatever makes an eons-old God decide that, yes, these are my people and I will die for them, it's going to be the most human thing we've ever done. We just have to figure out what it is. In 3 days. Before the sky fills with 2,000 ships. We had 3 days before 2,000 Vren warships reached Earth, and Dr. Osai was right. The thing that would tip the Guardian was going to be human-shaped. We just had to find it. And we found it in the end, in the last place anyone thought to look, in the Vren survivors we'd saved. Let me explain how, because it's the heart of the whole thing. The scattered Vren we'd taken in and healed, the beaten remnants of the advance fleet, had spent those days among us in a state their kind had no framework for. They'd conquered 400 worlds. They had never once in 1,000 years been on the losing end and not been destroyed for it. Their whole civilization ran on a simple law. The strong take, the weak are taken, and mercy is weakness because the strong never need it and the weak never receive it. That was the Vren truth, as ancient and certain to them as the Guardian's programming was to it. And then a conquered world had healed them instead of killing them, and it had broken something open in them that 1,000 years of conquest never had. There was one Vren in particular, an officer named Vresk Tal. I learned his name later because he became important. He'd commanded a ship in the advance fleet, had taken part in the conquest of Earth, had believed every word of the Empire's certainty. His ship had been crippled not by the Guardian but in the chaos of the retreat, and he'd crashed in the northern wastes and been pulled from the wreck half-dead by human rescuers who had every reason to leave him to die. They didn't. They saved him. And Vresk Tal spent 3 days recovering in a human shelter, watching a conquered people tend their conquerors, and somewhere in those 3 days, the 1,000-year certainty of the Vren Empire died in one of its own officers, and was replaced by something his language didn't have a word for. When the real fleet appeared, 2,000 ships, the Empire come to erase the world that had embarrassed it, Vresk Tal asked to speak to the human authorities, and he told them the thing that became the key. You do not understand what is coming, he said, or how to fight it, and you cannot fight it, not even with your machine. 2,000 ships, the main fleet. Your Guardian is wounded and old and it's strained against 200. It will not stop 2,000, and even if it could, the Empire would send 4,000, then 8 until you were gone. You cannot win this with the machine. He paused, and then he said the thing no Vren had ever said in 1,000 years. But you have already won something the Empire cannot survive. You have shown us, the survivors, that the central truth of our civilization is a lie. We believed mercy was weakness. You have proven it is a strength we never had the courage for. And I am not the only one who has seen it. There are survivors of your mercy scattered across this world and in the fleet that fled. Hundreds of us. And every one of us now carries the thing the Empire most fears, not a weapon. A doubt, the knowledge that the conquered can be greater than the conquerors. That is a fire, human. And the Empire is made of dry wood, 400 worlds of conquered peoples held in line by nothing but the certainty that resistance is meaningless and mercy is weakness. You have just disproven both. If that truth spreads, if the 400 worlds learn that a conquered people met the Empire's strength with mercy, and that mercy proved stronger, the Empire does not have enough ships to put that fire out. And Dr. Osai, listening, understood. And so finally did I. The condition that would tip the Guardian wasn't a battle, it was a choice. And the choice was this. The Guardian was built to protect the people of this world. It had warmed to us because we'd shown mercy. But mercy under no pressure is easy. The test that would prove us, truly prove us, the condition that would commit an eons-old God to our defense body and soul, was mercy under the gun. Mercy when it cost everything. The Vren main fleet was coming to erase us, and we held at that moment the survivors of the first fleet, hundreds of Vren, helpless in our hands. The empire that was coming to kill us had left its own people at our mercy. And the easy thing, the arithmetic thing, the thing the empire itself would have done and would expect us to do, was to use them as hostages, as shields, as a bargaining chip, or simply to kill them in rage before we died. Instead, humanity did the opposite, and it did it where the whole galaxy could see. Dr. Osai's plan, and it was insane, and it was right, was to broadcast. To take everything we had, every transmitter on Earth and in orbit, including the deep space relays I'd spent my small career tending, and aim them outward at the incoming Vren fleet and past it at the Empire at the 400 worlds. And to broadcast live for everyone to see. Humanity, conquered 3 weeks ago, facing erasure in 3 days, releasing the Vren survivors, healed, unharmed, sent home. With a message. I helped send it. Me, the relay tech. It was the most important thing I ever did, and all I did was point the antennas and open the channels, but it was mine, and I'll carry it forever. The message wasn't a threat. That was the genius of it. Dr. Osai wrote it, and Vresk Tal translated it into true Vren, into the language of the Empire's own certainty. And it went out to 400 worlds in the voice of a conquered people who should have been begging. People of the Empire. 3 weeks ago you conquered our world. We could not stop you. We are not stronger than you. We never will be. But you left your soldiers in our hands, and here is what we did with them. We healed them, and we are sending them home, unharmed, even as your great fleet comes to erase us. We do this not because we are weak. We do this because we have learned the thing your empire forgot 1,000 years ago, that mercy is not the absence of strength. It is the highest form of it. You have conquered 400 worlds by teaching them that resistance is meaningless and mercy is weakness. We are one small world, and we are probably about to die, but before we do, we wanted all 400 of you to see this, to see a conquered people choose mercy at the moment of their own destruction, and to wonder, each of you, whether the Empire ever had the strength we just showed you, whether your masters could ever do what we just did. We leave that thought with you. Do with it what you will. And we released the Vren survivors, and we sent them home, on the channels for everyone to see. A conquered world, facing annihilation, choosing mercy in front of the entire galaxy. And over the South Pole, the Guardian woke all the way up. I felt it again, that bone-deep vibration, the whole world thrumming. But this time it was different. This time when the Guardian's ancient lights flared, they didn't flare cold and white and assessing. They flared gold. Warm, full, certain. And Dr. Osai, watching her sensors, started to laugh and cry at the same time because the Guardian's whole signature had changed, had resolved, had snapped from the long uncertainty of 3 days into something total and final. It decided, she whispered. Cass, it decided. It was reading us this whole time, trying to determine if we were the people it was built to protect, and we just answered. Not with a signature, with a choice. We showed it mercy under the gun, mercy at the cost of our own survival, mercy broadcast to the whole galaxy when we had every reason to be cruel. And its makers, its wise long-dead makers, they did build it to recognize worth instead of blood. They built it to protect not their descendants but whoever inherited this world and proved worthy of it. And we just proved it, in the most human way possible, at the worst possible moment on purpose. Her voice broke completely. It's ours now. We're its people, it decided, and it is awake, all the way awake for the first time in eons, not a wounded thing dragging itself out of the ice, but a guardian that has found its people again after waiting alone in the dark for longer than we can imagine. Look at it. Look at it. I looked. and I will never forget it as long as I live." The Guardian rose off the pole, and it was not the slow, wounded thing that had descended 3 days before. It came up fast, sure, blazing gold, and as it rose, the old scars across its hull, the ancient wounds from the war eons gone, they kindled, lit from within, as if the thing had finally found a reason worth healing for. It rose into the sky over Earth, and it turned to face the incoming Vren fleet, 2,000 ships strong, and it did not look wounded or old or alone anymore. It looked like a Guardian who had its people back. The Vren main fleet arrived, and the last battle of that war was not really a battle either, but it was different from the first one, and the difference is the whole point. Because two things had happened at once. The Guardian had committed fully, totally, an eons-old god of war now blazing gold and absolutely certain that these were its people and it would defend them. And the message had landed. The broadcast. 400 worlds had watched a conquered people choose mercy at the moment of their death. And Vresk Tal had been right. The Empire was dry wood. 400 conquered worlds held in line by nothing but certainty, and we had just set a fire in the middle of it. The main fleet attacked. The Guardian met it. And this time it was not alone, and this time it was not wounded, and this time it fought not as a machine executing ancient programming, but as something defending the people it had chosen. I won't pretend the Guardian beat 2,000 ships easily. It didn't. It was the hardest thing I ever watched, and there were hours that day when I was certain we were all about to die, when the Guardian took hits that would have ended worlds and kept fighting, gold light streaming from 100 wounds. But it held. It held because it had a reason to hold now, and a thing with a reason fights differently than a thing without one. And the Empire broke, not because of the Guardian alone, because of the broadcast, because in the middle of that battle on the 400 conquered worlds, the fire we'd lit caught. World after world, watching the Empire's great fleet strain against one world that had shown them mercy, watching and remembering the message. Whether your masters could ever do what we just did, world after world began, for the first time in 1,000 years, to doubt, to resist, to refuse. The Empire that had never lost a ship in 400 conquests suddenly had 400 fires to put out at once, and not enough ships to do it, because it had sent 2,000 of them to erase one small merciful world, and that small merciful world would not die. The Vren fleet withdrew. The Empire in the months that followed did not fall in a day. These things never do, but it cracked, and the crack spread, and the 1,000-year certainty that had held 400 worlds in chains came apart, because one conquered people had proven in front of everyone that there was a strength the Empire never had. We didn't defeat the Vren Empire with the Guardian. We defeated it with mercy broadcast wide. At the moment, mercy cost the most, and the Guardian was simply the thing that bought us the time to be merciful, and then the thing that stood over us, gold and certain, while the mercy did its work. The Guardian stayed. That's the part I love best. When it was over, when the fleet had withdrawn and the Empire had begun its long, slow collapse and Earth, impossibly, was free, the Guardian did not go back to sleep under the ice. It had no reason to anymore. Its people were here. It rose into a high orbit over Earth and it stayed there, gold and patient and awake, a Guardian that had found its purpose again after eons of waiting alone in the cold. We never did fully learn to talk to it. Dr. Os, I spent the rest of her life trying and got further than anyone, but the Guardian remained mostly silent, mostly unknowable, a mind too old and too strange for us to ever really reach. But we learned to live with it and it with us, and over the years a kind of understanding grew that didn't need words. It watched over us. It read the state of our world, the way it always had, and as long as we remained the kind of people it had decided we were, merciful, worthy, the people of this world in the way that mattered, it stayed, and it guarded, and it was content. And we, for our part, never forgot what it had taught us or what we taught it, because that was the thing in the end. The Guardian had been built by a wise, vanished people to recognize worth instead of blood, to protect not their own descendants but whoever proved worthy of protection. And in waking it, in passing its test, we'd been forced to become worthy. The Guardian didn't just save us. It made us better, because being better was the price of being saved. And once we'd paid that price, we couldn't unpay it. A conquered, frightened, beaten people had chosen mercy at the moment of their destruction. And that choice had freed not just Earth but 400 worlds. And it had all started because an empire that believed mercy was weakness had accidentally woken a machine built by people who knew better. I'm old now, telling this. I lived a whole life in the free world that day made got off Havers Station eventually, married, had kids, grew old under the gold light of the Guardian in the high orbit, which is still there, which will probably be there long after I'm gone, watching over a people it chose. My grandchildren ask me about it. They've only ever known the Guardian as a fact of the sky, a benevolent presence, the great gold light that means safe. They can't imagine the 3 weeks when we were conquered, or the 3 days when we didn't know if the thing that saved us would turn on us next, or the afternoon when a god of war decided whether we were worth defending. To them, it's just history. The day the Empire found Earth and woke the Guardian. A story with a happy ending. And I let them think that mostly because they're young and the world is kind to them and that's how it should be. But when they're older, I tell them the true version, the one that matters, the one I've told you. The Empire didn't lose because we had a bigger weapon. We didn't. The Guardian was old and wounded and probably couldn't have beaten the full Empire alone. The Empire lost because it had spent 1,000 years believing that mercy was weakness and strength was everything, and it ran into a small conquered world that proved, in front of the whole galaxy at the cost of its own life, that it had that exactly backwards. The Guardian was built by people who understood that. They built a god that would only protect the merciful, because they knew, across all that vast time, they knew that mercy was the thing worth building a god to protect. The Empire found Earth and accidentally triggered a dormant war machine. That's the title of the story, and it's true. But it's not the real story. The real story is that the war machine was a test, left by wise people who'd vanished, set to wake and to judge, and the thing it tested for wasn't strength. It was the willingness to be merciful when cruelty would have been easier and safer and more natural. And a conquered human race with everything to lose passed that test, chose mercy at the worst possible moment on purpose, for the whole galaxy to see, and in passing it, freed 400 worlds and earned the gold light that still watches over my grandchildren's sky. The Empire conquered 400 worlds by being certain that strength was everything. We freed all 400 by proving, at the moment of our own destruction, that it never was. That's what the Guardian woke up to find. That's why it stayed. And that's the thing I most want my grandchildren to carry, long after I'm gone, under that patient gold light. The thing worth building a god to protect was never our strength. It was our mercy. And it turned out a frightened, beaten, conquered people had more of it than an empire of 400 worlds ever did.